Aristotle said, a friend is one soul abiding in two bodies. Today, we're led to believe that there is a body containing many souls out there, which is our friend. It is known as the United Nations, and many of the souls we make it up are very bad souls, like Russia, China, Islamic Republic of Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Afghanistan, and the list continues. Of course, we use the term soul to indicate the ideology which moves such nations, not in a mystical sense like you would for a religious thing. Anyway, according to an article written by Mehdi Hassan on The Guardian, no less, Israel should have belonged to this family of nations. Israel is not a friend. Israel's soul is too good, or according to him, too bad for the United Nations.
So we're going to discuss this article and some others to go with it. And we're joined with this with both Michael and Daniel. So thank you guys for joining us. So we're talking about this persona non grata of Mehdi Hassan, if I can use that phrase, a phrase he uses in the article. I think the persona non grata is our new name for the Candice list. Which is the list of people we'd rather not talk about. But at least we don't have to hear from him this time, and we don't have to hear him talking 100 miles an hour as he normally does. We can actually see his logic or lack of it laid out on a piece of paper. We can see the gaps, the omissions. We can see his context drops, etc. So let me start with you, Michael. Initially, with your thoughts on the general topic that he's talking about here, which is the United Nations and whether Israel should be in it or not. And his approach to it. What do you think?
Well, I think people should be judged purely by their actions, a little bit by their words, because words are important and they usually lead to actions. But at the end of the day, I think people should be judged by their actions. I think conflating what the UN was when it was formed or around when it was formed and it transformed from the League of Nations to the United Nations to what it is today is ridiculous. And I think just like you don't judge a person who recently murdered someone and go back to when before they murdered someone and say, well, they were a good person before, so we're going to pretend even after the murder that they do that. I think this is a ridiculous conversation, frankly, about the United Nations. It's a misnomer of a term, and I think we should judge them purely by their action.
And your opening thoughts, Daniel?
I always talked about how it's always interesting to find someone who is so philosophically opposed to you that they are suddenly really correct on many things. And I think the first time that sort of came to see is when Ayn Rand talked about Kant, and she recognized a lot of things that he had like proper observations about many things, but he just took it in a really bad direction. And I feel similarly, Mehdi Hassan is my Immanuel Kant. Like whenever I hear him talk, he despite him being like so philosophically opposed to me, he oftentimes sees like a good observation. And when I look at when I went through his article, when he talks about basically why he also used many of the Israeli statements sort of condemning the UN, but he also used a lot of actions of Israel against the UN. And his question was, if this is all true, why is Israel in the UN? And my observation is the same. If this is all true, why is Israel in the UN? If Israel has so many problems with the UN, why is it still there? And, this is not from some sort of like, I'm trying to criticize Israel. I think their observations, the way Israel is acting towards UN, similarly to when Netanyahu had his speech in the UN, both the fact that the speech was used so they could kill Hassan Nasrallah when his guard was down, and the fact that he condemned UN while doing a UN speech, I think it was the correct thing to do. And I really want to see the last step of this rhetoric and these actions, and it's leaving UN.
Yeah, I mean, the main assumption here that the UN is a good thing. The fact that criticize the UN is seen as a sin nowadays. The UN, in virtue of the fact that it's a united something, i.e., it's a collection of things. It's collectivism made visible to everyone, and not only that, but also funded by top dollar of our money. Our states fund that kind of ridiculous assembly of unelected official and technocrats and whatever they are. Because of that, they are seen as something good. Just again, because collectivism is seen as good. A group of people is always better than an individual in today's society, and which is exactly what we are fighting against. We're here on the channel. We're trying to make the point that the individual needs to be left free, alone, to act and take his own decision for its own interest. And a lot of happy, free individual will eventually lead to a happy society, not the way around. You cannot always impose and effectively allow the individual to live in virtue of the gift given by the collective onto him. It's totally the way around. And that's why things are not really working nowadays, because there's this assumption that the collective has always the priority over the individual.
And always set up with a load of false alternatives, like not doing that, taking that route means you're isolated and alone and never cooperate with anybody. When of course you do cooperate. You should cooperate the same as you would with your own choice of friends, with the friends based on your shared values. And so you should cooperate with the nations based on shared values. And that, of course, will bring up the relevance of France. We'll get to it a little later in this episode, no doubt. But I'll save that for the cherry on the cake.
Yeah, if I could just add one quick thing to that, I think there's also this notion that the collective is somehow some kind of a beehive of minds that get together and arrive at an almost artificial, intelligently better solution to problems than any individuals. I had a huge fight during my college at Amherst College with a political science teacher when he kept talking to us about the collective instead of and I said, when is there a brain that's part of a collective? I'm aware of only individual brains and individual thinking. I understand a discussion, but I don't understand this collective. Let's keep in mind that all collectives are made up of people. And in almost every collective in the history of humanity, those collectives have become essentially the rulers and the dominating rulers of the people that are under them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the number of people isn't the determinant to whether an argument is correct or not. And many, many people can and are regularly wrong about things. And it's the correspondence to reality that's relevant, isn't it? It's the link to reality, which is the ultimate arbiter of truth. So, Daniel, did you want to start the article, looking through it in some detail?
Yeah, just quickly before that, just the last comment about the UN before we go to the article. The fact that UN sort of existence and the way sort of what its goal is supposed to be, wouldn't really work for any other organizations. I'm a big fan of NATO and European Union, which some people don't like the second part, but something that has been failing with both actually recently is that they have certain standards when it comes to their countries. When it comes to NATO, you basically have to have I think there is a certain amount of you cannot be like a really corrupt nation. There are certain standards for joining in. Everybody has to agree when you want to join in, every single nation. And those are generally being upheld, although I think they were lacking. I think they are currently lacking when it comes to nations like Turkey. Similar with the European Union, you have to have a certain there's a certain requirements of being a democratic nation. There's a certain requirements for not being a corrupt nation, not being ruled by oligarchs, and even that has been failing, I think, especially with Hungary recently, and even with my country, Slovakia. I think the European Union is too lenient on my own country. But it's not the case with the UN. Anyone can join, pretty much, as long as the 5 big nations don't oppose it, you can join. There are no standards. There are no standards to basically be some type of nation. So if you are some African warlord who manages to take over the nation in a civil war, congratulations, you have a seat in the UN. You have the same you pretty much have the same voting powers as every other nation, as I've said, besides the big 5, and you'll most likely be voting against Israel in every single instance you can. Should we go to the article?
Okay, I need to express my disagreement with your EU comparison, but we haven't got time for the hour and a half that would take. But I'll leave it that aside.
Just think of NATO and ignore the. I like it still. As I've said, the article from Mehdi Hassan, the title is "Israel is a rogue nation. It should be removed from the United Nations." And now reading, one rogue nation cannot declare war on the UN itself and continue to get away with it. Over the past year, Israel has launched attacks on multiple countries and occupied territories: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. Yet countries and territories aside, Israel has also targeted one specific organization with a series of unprecedented rhetorical and violent attacks. Yes, the United Nations. We have all witnessed Israel effectively declare war on the UN. Would you guys like to comment before we go to specific things he brings up?
Well, I mean, first of all, Media Sam, we already spoken about him a number of times on this channel. I mean, the guy is just a mouthpiece for Hamas and every Islamic nutter out there who just want to cause mayhem, destruction, and death. So, having said that, is also, you know, an idiot. You can describe the guy in a different way. He always uses arguments from authority, just mentioning somebody else. Oh, this guy said this, therefore what I'm telling you now is true. He always uses this kind of stuff. He's educated in Oxford, I think.
Yeah.
And he uses his education, I mean, if you can call it education, to push through some argument that don't stand at all. But also he speaks very loudly, and he's morally a moral pygmy. He doesn't have morality at all, this guy. Recently, he was in a debate with Elon Levy, and he refused. He refused to wear the yellow ribbon. To acknowledge the presence of the hostages still held by the Gazans. He refused to do it. I mean, at the same time, we'll say, "Oh yeah, I care for every hostages," but he refused. He refused to wear it for a reason. His ideology is so twisted. His way of thinking and debating is so twisted that he cannot see anything beyond what he's arguing. So, frankly, personally, every time I see his name, I know already I'm about to read a bunch of BS. So I'm not surprised that, first of all, he sees the UN as a country which can be declared war against. I mean, even making that assumption is somebody deliberately twisting the meaning or even war declaration.
I think for me, he comes across as an articulate idiot. Which is what kind of the worst kind, to be honest. And with this particular presentation at the start of this article, it's like he's talking in religious terms, really, like he's presenting the UN in religious terms. It's sacrilege to criticize the UN, to criticize the church of the UN. And if you do so, you should be excommunicated. That's the argument he's making here. Thou darest not criticize the UN, because to do so should have you thrown out. Now, you should absolutely be criticizing all of the things that the UN has been up to lately, which we are undoubtedly going to list in terms of its cooperation with Hamas and its anti-Israel, anti-Semitic tendencies, to say the least. But you know, yeah, let's make that a starting point.
I think it was Bonnie in the chat who said it pretty well. It's amazing the way he drops context, because the way he says it, over the past year, Israel has launched attacks on multiple countries and occupied territories. I can just imagine him writing article in like 1943 over the last year. America has launched attacks on Italy, Japan, Germany,
yeah.
and it's like, how can you drop context so much? Just going by the list, the Gaza Strip. I wonder what happened about a year ago that has warranted attacks on the Gaza Strip. The West Bank. I don't know what specifically he means, but there were there were terrorist attacks coming out of the West Bank, coming out of the Palestinian territories, even before October 7, but also after October 7. In some cases, daily attacks basically coming out of there. Lebanon, Hezbollah has launched attack on Israel on October 8th, just the day after, and they were planning to join Hamas on like October 7 like attack. They just didn't, they didn't have I cannot think of that word. He also mentioned Syria, Yemen, Iran. Again, Iran is funding all of this. Yemen has not only been attacking Israel directly, has been attacking international shipping, or rather, I should say the Houthis. Although I don't know why he specifically specifies Yemen when he should talk about the Houthis, and Syria again, another country that both is funded by Iran, is actively harboring many terrorists, and is actively working with Iran against Israel. So
and
yeah, the
has
fact
half
that
a million dead people in their civil war because of this Iran-sponsored terrorism. 500,000. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
No, I think you I knew the least about Syria, so I'm glad someone knows a bit more who could say. But yeah, it's insane. So do you want to continue with the record he set out?
Well,
And
maybe if I can interrupt, sorry, because I think when someone starts off with a statement like that, I think you have to stop and you have to say, whoa, is this somebody who's credible at all? The notion that Israel started any of these wars is the same notion that, as you said,
just quickly to
Daniel,
jump in because of what he precisely says. He says
okay.
launched attacks against
Sorry.
this.
Launched attacks, yeah.
Which is it's such a, because technically it's true. Israel did launch attacks against these countries, but sort of implying both that it started it, implying that it was wrong thing to do, and implying that it just came out of nowhere as if nothing happened.
Well, the correct word would have been counterattacks, which of course he conveniently left off. But I think it's really important to stop there for a minute and look at that statement because it is so egregious. And if you want to believe somebody like him, you might as well go back, as you said beautifully, Daniel, and rewrite World War II history and blame England and blame France and blame America for winning the war or for fighting back against Nazi Germany. And you should blame all the victims, by the way, that were overrun by Nazi Germany first. And if that's the kind of world you want to live in, and that is the kind of world people like him and all of the Islamic militants want to live in, then we don't need to talk about, I mean, we're going to continue the discussion today, but they've completely lost all credibility. The historical fact, and I would argue it's not even context, and this is not a mistake. This is to portray Israel as a country like China that wants to go in and take over Taiwan, for example. This is to portray Israel as a country like Russia that wants to annihilate Ukraine and take it back in and then continue to repopulate the Soviet Union. And this is just absurd, and it's contravened by facts and history, and we all know that. But we cannot give them any moment. We can't let any airspace in between that statement and our discussion, because as soon as we even begin to accept that premise a little bit, we lose the argument. We end up in the yeah, but, which is the biggest problem that Israel has from a public relations point of view. We keep getting into the yeah, buts, defensive stuff, and they attacked us. End of story. We will annihilate them. That's the story. They attacked us, we annihilate them. Done, in my opinion, simply. Now we can get into details. Sorry.
Let me read the super chats before we go on. So first, thank you, Alexei, for your super chat. He says the relevance of France. I think Richard made a comment about France earlier. That is also basically President Macron made a statement about that Israel should be thankful to the UN because Israel was founded by the UN. So we have time. We're gonna look at that also. We have a super sticker from Jonathan. Thank you so much. We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says this person is a hate preacher. He needs to be removed from the U.S. Enough born citizens are nasty in U.S. We also have a super chat from Bull Mustang. Is Mehdi Hassan an American citizen? I thought he's British.
He was born in Britain, but he took American citizenship after doing his show for so long over there.
And we also have a super chat from Bull Moose. Thank you so much. He says, if you tell him to act like it's opposite day, he'll actually tell the truth. And that's why his rhetoric is deliberate, not from being brainwashed. Well, just an epistemological point. A clock is not a broken clock is not right twice a day, because truth is an epistemological statement. You don't just happen to say the correct sequence of words. It's actual, you have to, and also with people like Mehdi Hassan, he knows what's true. I don't think he is at a statement where he just doesn't know what's really going on. He knows what's going on, and especially with the amount of knowledge he has, he deliberately, like saying Israel launched attacks on these countries or on these territories. It's something you have to go look into to know which specific nations Israel has launched attacks against, and you have to deliberately evade the reasons for them doing so and what has happened before.
And one thing I'd to add, just before we go into it any deeper, is just to recognize who this is directed at. And the fact this is a Guardian article directed at Guardian readers who already are on the same page as Mehdi Hassan in terms of seeing Israel as the enemy and accepting this starting point as a valid premise for taking the rest of the argument forward, and therefore not questioning that starting point, but already being fired up to act on the following arguments. Which is, the standard technique he does. He's talking to a home crowd here, and we should remember that when we tear it apart.
Let's continue with the article. Here he's gonna list a bunch of things. I don't want to comment on every single one, but if you guys want to comment on a specific one or a bunch of them, then just stop me while I'm reading, and I might comment also. So he continues, consider the record of recent weeks and months. Israel's prime minister, while standing on a stage at the UN General Assembly, denounced the body as contemptible, a house of darkness, and a swamp of anti-Semitic bile. Israel's outgoing ambassador to the UN shredded a copy of the UN Charter with a miniature paper shredder while also standing at the podium of the General Assembly. The latter said the UN headquarters and later said the UN headquarters in New York should be closed and wiped off the face of the earth. Israel's foreign minister falsely accused the UN Secretary General of not having condemned Iran's attacks on Israel, declared him persona non grata in Israel, and announced that he had banned him from entering the country. Here, I just to say, because he says falsely accused, so what UN Secretary General said was something like, he didn't condemn the attack. He said, he later deleted even that tweet, but he said something along the lines of, we should have we shouldn't have a regional war, there should be more peace, we should have a ceasefire. Some, vague statement, not, if you didn't know what has happened on that specific day, you'd have no idea if he is even talking about the specific event. Continuing, the Israeli government actively obstructed a UN-mandated commission of inquiry trying to collect evidence on the October 7th attacks. Israel's parliament is in the process of designating a long-standing UN agency, UNRWA, as a terrorist organization. The Israeli...
Sorry, I'm tempted to cut in there because there's so many things that are making me hop out of my seat. And the idea that you would let the UN in immediately after October the 7th to simply get in the way, which is exactly what would have happened at that point is absolute nonsense. And the idea that you can defend UNRWA at this stage with the amount of evidence that's, video evidence, tunnel evidence, infrastructure evidence, evidence of people's activity on October the 7th, increasing evidence as time goes on of the extent to which UNRWA is complicit and a promoter of anti-Semitism at every opportunity, is just, it's just beggars belief, doesn't it? And of course the idea that you shouldn't stand in the UN, in New York and criticize the UN when that's exactly where it does need to be heard. That's exactly the podium you should be using to criticize all of the organization that is being so nefarious in every activity. I mean, in the same way that Millet criticizes organizations he speaks to, I'm delighted to see him do that, not go to them and pander to them and weaken his words and sound like anybody else, but to say what you really think. And then when it comes to the demonstrations of like shredding things and stuff, you need to do the PR thing as well. You need to be able to get your views heard against the barrage of anti-Israel PR that exists across the board. So there's no wonder they use those kind of techniques in order simply to be heard.
So continuing, the Israeli military has bombed UN schools, warehouses, and refugee camps in Gaza for 12 consecutive months and killed a record 228 UN employees in the process, by far the highest number of our this is a quote, by far the highest number of our personnel killed in the single conflict or natural disaster since the creation of the United States, to quote the UN Secretary General. Again, here you see the same amount of basically dropping a large amount of context.
Well, I think we should be blunt, though. There's no question that UNRWA is colluding and actively supporting. There's 2 points here. One is that UNRWA is actively colluding and supporting Hamas. No question. In fact, even to the point where Sinwar's bodyguard or a friend or whatever is a member of UNRWA, and his passport was found on Sinwar, even to this last day. The second point is that if Hamas is going to inhabit UN schools and UN hospitals and UN whatever, then Israel should blow the heck out of them. Period. If you are housing military, then you are a military installation. That's more important than anything else. And Israel has absolutely every right and a duty to demolish those structures. So there's 2 lies embedded in this situation here, as you say, context, but I think we should use stronger terms because I think these are lies. They're lies of omission. They are not the whole truth or anywhere close to the whole truth. And they're actually designed maliciously to mislead, as you already said, Daniel.
Absolutely right. I mean, yeah, I think you've summarized it well. The amount of collusion we've seen between UNRWA and between Hamas, and not even to mention the again the similar sort of thing that has been happening between UNIFIL and Hezbollah. The fact that UNIFIL has been doing nothing about Hezbollah. And sort of just putting it out there, so he specifically mentions the bombing of UN school warehouses and refugee camps. Hamas has been using this, has been either using, let's say, the vehicles of the UN, not just UNRWA, even the UN vehicles. It has been building, or it had the headquarters under the UN building. It has been hiding in the UNRWA schools. So again, this, as you said, a lie of omission. Continuing, the Israeli military is now also attacking UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. According to the UN, 5 UN blue helmets serving with UNIFIL in Lebanon have been injured as Israeli forces inflicted damage on UN positions close to the blue line. So in here, I just like to say, so Netanyahu asked UNIFIL to basically get out because they are not doing anything about it. And something we have seen is Hezbollah firing deliberately close from sites close to UNIFIL positions. So if there is any retaliation, there is a chance that basically the UNIFIL forces might be hit too. And UNIFIL is, again, not doing anything about it. We haven't seen anything them doing, and they have been there for decades with a specific goal that has just not been achieved. And again, who is being punished for that? It's Israel who is the problematic part, not UNIFIL, not actually adhering to any part of what its supposed goal is.
Yeah,
So these were
reiterate that. I think it's super important, and he conveniently left it out. The one UN resolution, maybe there are two that are relevant here, 1701 especially, that these UN peacekeepers, and I want to get into that word in a minute, but this UN resolution actually mandates that the UN in Lebanon prevents Hezbollah from doing exactly what Hezbollah has been doing now for many, many years, but especially since October 8th. So ironically, there's actually a UN resolution that tells the UN to stop Hezbollah below the Litani River, from south of the Litani River, and it's exactly contrary to what has actually happened. And that's number one. Number two, it's a great word, the UN peacekeepers. What UN peacekeepers? What peace is there? When somebody has 150,000 missiles ready to fire at you, what does this mean, peacekeepers? And by the way, there has been no peace for decades, and certainly not since October 8th. So all of this, it is beautifully written for an idiot who knows nothing else to understand that Israel is a rogue nation on par with North Korea and the like, and needs to be ostracized.
So continuing with the article, so he lists off those points, and now he's saying, how is any of this okay, acceptable, legal? Perhaps the biggest question of all, how is Israel still allowed to remain a member of the UN? Why has it not yet been expelled from an organization that it is relentlessly and shamelessly attacking and undermining? Sure, there are other human rights abusers that remain card-carrying members of the UN. Syria, Russia, North Korea, to name a few. But none of them have killed UN employees en masse. None of them have sent tanks to invade the UN base. None of them have refused to comply with more than a dozen UN Security Council resolutions. It has been more than 60 years since any country of the world dared make the UN Secretary General himself persona non grata. To be clear, it's not as if there isn't a mechanism for expelling a UN member state. Article 6 of the UN Charter says a member of the United Nations which has persistently violated the principles contained in the present charter may be expelled from the organization by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the UN of the Security Council. Marco, anything you'd like to say on that?
Well, I mean, the serial spurious event clubbed together and sanitized in a way to present his argument are just so incredibly pathetic. As Michael already covered the point, I mean, the sudden, for example, the sudden outrage for UNIFIL that occurred only a few weeks ago because while firing back at Hezbollah, some pointless UN person was scared. You know, they must have fallen off their chair or something. They poured their own coffee against them because of the vibration. I mean, in one case, there was a tunnel shaft or a tunnel shaft 100 yards from an installation, a UNIFIL installation. Now, if you ever dug a hole in the garden in order to plant something, you realize how long it takes to dig the bloody thing. Imagine a tunnel shaft. How much infrastructure it requires, how much time, how many hours, how many spoils you're gonna see, the noise you provide 100 yards away from an installation. Or people who are paid $500 million a year they cost for doing what? Just for sharing the cash and looking the other way when they see Hezbollah. But the thing that really gets on my nerves is that Israel, by playing whatever role they're playing with the UN, they're effectively sanctioning the evil, which is hitting them on the head. Really, they are giving credibility to the UN itself, and they effectively enable the UN to tell them off every time they try and defend themselves. And that's part of the problem here. The DNA of the UN is actually a bunch of dictatorships. You know, the creation of the UN started with USSR and China. How can you possibly rely on an institution. I can understand that immediately after the war, people were a bit more, forgiving. But in 2024, when you still have more dictatorships than democratic civilized countries as members of this club, do you really want to be part of them? It's just beyond belief that nobody, apart, Israel first of all, and the United States and other civilized country don't decide to, you know what, this thing, it doesn't work, it failed, let's move on, and then perhaps set something else up.
And look at the context drop that he's got there in terms of other countries not pulling aggressive acts. Obviously, Lebanon's been firing 8,000, 9,000 rockets, haven't they, since October the 7th? You got Iran, who uses umpteen proxies and, of course, fires its own rockets straight at Israel as well. If you want to be, precise about it, it does it both ways. So you can't say, well, that they've been fine. They've just got a bad reputation, a bad name. But Israel's the really bad one. Who does it convince other than somebody who has decided that is their position before they start and just wants to, wants a pat on the head?
Yeah, and so one point I had sort of already, and then I decided not to do it. And now that I've reread it, I've decided to do it. Because I think someone called him out on this, saying, well, you advocate for Israel to be kicked out, but you don't advocate for like other nations to be kicked out. And I've seen him in a different interview sort of like being consistent and saying, yes, these other nations should be also kicked out. But now in the article, when he calls out nations like Syria, Russia, and North Korea, which I'd say they definitely deserve a place. I think they are consistent with the current ideology of the UN. But what he said is, yes, these nations are bad, but Israel is worse. He looks at Russia, North Korea, and Syria, and Israel, and he sees Israel as worse as this. Just a heads up. North Korea is such a totalitarian dictatorship that we don't even know how much of a totalitarian dictatorship is. The only knowledge we sort of have is people who somehow manage to escape and later on say it afterwards. Russia has started more than 2 years ago, and even longer, about 10 years ago, has started a war against basically a sovereign nation, and not only started a war, has like annexed actual parts of the territory, which is again unprecedented for such a long time in Europe. And I don't even have to talk about Syria. I mean, the fact that you look at these three, and Israel is the one that you see as problematic here. Again, what do you even say? It shows like how much remote from reality are you, or how much of a propagandist you are, that basically you want to make sure that every single thing points towards Israel is the worst thing ever.
Yeah, and also
one of the things. Sorry, go ahead, Marco.
Well, go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Just one thing they didn't point out, which I was surprised, is there's been more UN resolutions against Israel than, as far as I know, every other country combined over the last 10 or 20 years. Israel is such a rogue state that even though it's a democracy with an elected government, and even though Arabs have the same rights as Israelis in Israel, it's just the worst. And I'm surprised you didn't throw that out too. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, you're right. You would think that the institution of the UN is obsessed with Israel, isn't it? But I was saying, replying to what Daniel talking about how much of a propagandist this guy is. To be honest, he's also a spineless little coward, because he doesn't have the cojones to actually say that he hates Israel, he hates the Jews. He always has to come up with this kind of half-truth, implying, obfuscation, make you believe this, make you believe that. Just come out with it. Have the strength of your conviction and say what you really think, because we can see through. It's so obvious what you're saying, but it doesn't even have the spine to say it. That's just so pathetic.
I think one of the things the nature of this article is revealing is how much the UN is feeling battered at the moment, and deservedly so, to be honest, and how its defenders are coming out of the woodwork to try and defend its reputation in the face of what has been, for many people, an eye-opening awakening how evil it is. To be honest, I think you can really sense the palpable fear that the UN is at risk long term, not tomorrow probably, but long term, if this relentless attack continues on it and if it doesn't defend itself. And of course, it's not defending itself from the right premises at the moment. It's defending itself in the form of cover up, lies, and distraction, and of course, as ever, pointing the finger at Israel.
Well, as you intimated too, and they could get a majority vote to condemn Israel. That's terrific. As we've said many times on here, just because the majority believes something doesn't mean it's right. You can do a simple thought experiment. It's very simple. Leave Israel alone. Everybody don't touch Israel. Pull out. Stop beating them up. Let them do their thing. What would happen tomorrow? Israel would continue to build skyscrapers in Tel Aviv, continue to innovate, continue to have a population that's growing, and do good stuff in the world. That's what they would do. They're not going to go invade Gaza. They're not going to go invade Lebanon. They have no interest. They're not going to bother with the part of the West Bank that's not creating IEDs and so forth. It's very simple. And everybody in Israel knows this. Israel does not want conflict, period. They want to focus on living. They love life. Whereas the countries that are surrounding them love death. I don't know how else, why is it such a difficult concept for the world to get that? I think the world does get it. I think that there are obviously a lot of political games going around. But when you judge someone, you have to ask those sorts of questions.
We have a super chat from Alex. Thank you so much. She says, we will say in English anything that you desire, but we'll make you obey Sharia when we have the power. Let me share a secret that always cheers my mood. When we say peace process, we mean, and now I'm going to butcher Idbah el Yahud, which I translated, and it means, I think I'll massacre Jews or will massacre Jews. Michael, is that like an actual, like a poem or something? Or is that...
Oh, that I don't know. No, I don't know it. Sorry.
So thank you, Alex, so much. So continuing with the article. Oh my God, so much left. Now, some might point out that no member state has ever been expelled from the UN under Article 6. Plus, the United States, which has vetoed over 50 UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel since the early 1970s, would never allow such a recommendation of the Security Council to be made. It's a valid objection. History, however, teaches us that there are workarounds to Security Council vetoes. As the international law professor and former U.S. State Department advisor Thomas Grant pointed out in October 2022, while making his own case for expelling Russia from the United Nations in the wake of Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, UN members on 2 occasions in the past have judged a particular member delegation no longer fit to sit at the organization's table. On both occasions, the UN improvised a solution. In 1971, socialist and non-aligned nations in the Global South voted in the UN General Assembly to recognize the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representative of China to the United Nations, and thereby replaced the representatives from Republic of China, Taiwan, which had been a founding member of the UN. Republic of China was out, People's Republic of China was in. And it was the General Assembly, not the Security Council, that decided it. So come on, guys, we can figure out how to get Israel out. If we can get Communist China in and kick out, although I'm not sure how free Taiwan was at the point, but it was definitely comparatively much more free than the People's Republic of China. If we can kick out free nations in favor of more authoritarian communist nations, we can also kick out Israel. So, let's get on it.
Isn't he making the argument for us about how corrupt and appalling the UN is? And isn't this phrase, history teaches us that there are workarounds to Security Council vetoes? I mean, never mind which of the 5 nations are and who can veto, and the fact that some of them shouldn't be able to veto anything. Doesn't that tell you exactly how it works? That it's a slippery, pragmatist, amoral abyss, or immoral to a large extent, but even if you call it amoral, it does what it wants to do when it wants to do it. And of course, your China example there. I mean, he lays it out for you. I mean, what I love about these kind of articles is the extent to which they reveal all of the arguments which you make in a different context and which they deny. They slip them out endlessly in the course of making their argument, albeit the argument full of omissions and holes and deceptions.
Yeah, and also he doesn't remind us how they took a minute silence when Raisi died on the helicopter thing. I mean, this guy is the second-hand man of a dictator, theocratic dictator, and they stood there in mourning for this guy. Well, what kind of organization does that? Not even Spectre and James Bond would do that. I mean, and the fact that they can't even get together enough strength to issue a statement about the killing of Sinwar. I mean, they are so anti-Israel. They've become so anti-Semitic in their procedures and their DNA that they can no longer even pretend that to use the diplomacy channels that they normally are famous for. They've lost the ability of hide how anti-Semitic and anti-Israel they are, because in the last year they gone against every single procedure and process and destroyed every single institution in order to make sure Israel would stop defending itself. They corrupted the procedure for the ICJ, the ICC, everything they can put their hands on, they will ruin it, they will throw it and destroy just with the purpose of attacking or stopping or making Israel's life impossible. And this kind of behavior destroys the very institution that they were supposed to protect and run. But the hate for Israel is too big; they can't contain it.
And that point about Sinwar, that point about not recognizing Sinwar's death and not declaring how good that is, exposes the fact that when they talk about Hamas is different from the Palestinian people, they don't believe that themselves, because they see Sinwar as the same, and therefore we can't come out and say how delighted we are that an evil man like Sinwar is no more.
Yeah, look, I think one other thing we should mention about the UN while we're talking is the UN is wonderful at doublespeak, as George Orwell would call it. First of all, the name, as we've said, the UN is already absurd, because much like the USSR, it wasn't a union of Soviet socialist republics. It was a dictatorship over the Soviet socialist republics. And as you know from the term Democratic Republic of Congo, this is one of the most authoritarian, awful regimes on the planet. But of course, it's the Democratic Republic, so it must be good. And the UN has done the same thing. They have a wonderful group in part of the UN, which is the United Nations Human Rights Council. And the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the standing members right now. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Qatar, all kinds of really great places.
Well, so they can learn.
And exactly. It's an aspirational thing. Venezuela used to be there. I forget right now who is chairing this amazing place. But, this just says the whole thing is baloney. The whole thing is a corrupt organization from top to bottom. It is a disgraceful organization. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment we have to teach our children about it. And that is one of the toughest things to explain to kids. And I remember explaining it to my kids many 10, 15 years ago when they were growing up, that the UN is a largely anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, anti-human rights organization that is paid for by the US and a bunch of other countries, so that the crap countries in the world have a platform to basically scream at Israel, the United States, and every other Western democracy.
Well, surprisingly, I don't think I learned in the school about the UN. When I was in primary school, like last year or so. And the reason was because every year we had a history, but when we took the history, we always started at the start and went through, and every single grade we again started from the start and went through and just did it a bit differently. But because of that, we always like stopped at World War II because we just ran out of time to actually finish the rest of it. So we never learned about what happened after World War II. So that's where Slovak education is currently.
But in primary schools in the UK, they have special UN days where the students all represent each country and all act like they're in one, unified group discussing how to make the world a better place.
So they all beat up the Israeli kid or something?
No doubt. I dread to think, to be honest.
We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, so-called Palestine will never be a UN full member. US will stop it at the Security Council. Currently, that's the way it is. Basically, you have to be a member, a full-fledged member of the UN, you have to basically not be vetoed by the 5 big nations. I think that's a big part why Kosovo is, for example, not a UN member, is because Russia, and I think neither China will allow it, and few more places like that. We have a super chat from Alex. Thank you so much. Although there is a push for recognizing the Palestinian territories, as they are currently referred to, as a full-fledged member. Alex says, the UN is an anti-concept. They are neither united nor nations. Well, as we did one episode, they are united in anti-Semitism, and I think that's what the united in the United Nations stands for. So let's quickly, we won't be able to go through the full article, so I'm just going to read a few of the last paragraphs. So, evicting Israel from the UN, or at least suspending its participation in the General Assembly as a first step, would send a powerful message, both to the people of Israel and to the rest of the world, that the authority of the United Nations still matters, that the lives of the UN staff and peacekeepers also matter, and that one rogue nation cannot declare war on the UN itself and continue to get away with it. And I think it would be powerful. That's why I think Israel should leave first and don't let these things happen to you. Because what kind of nation do you have to be to get kicked out of the UN?
Well, to be honest, the thrust of this last bit of the article annoyed me particularly, because it makes it sound like to be an independent state, you have to have the wave through from the UN. There is an institution that decide whether you can be a real nation, a real state. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hassan, but actually, sovereign individuals get together, give themselves a government in order to run their own affairs under their own decisions, because doing so allows them to prosper. And free people will get together and create a free society where the individuals will thrive. Just to decide to cobble together a bunch of dictatorship and slave owners and whatever to create a state is not enough to have a state. So you can have as many big institutions, as many big great sounding names and job description and all this kind of stuff, but it doesn't legitimate a nation just because the UN said so.
And this line, the authority of the UN still matters, pleaded its defender. Please tell me it still matters. Everybody needs to think it still matters. Well, it doesn't, and it shouldn't.
Michael, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I think Israel should leave the UN. I think it should be coordinated with the US, but I think they should tell them it's enough already. And we don't want to be part of this, and we're happy to be the rogue nation that left, because I think that will, for people that have a brain, that will send some very clear messages. You can find me at Kaufman with 2 Fs, Michael at on LinkedIn, and I'm going to jump off, guys, because I have another call. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Michael.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Marco, where can people find you, and last words?
Yeah, sister channels to this one, the briefly objective. You can find short content, the stuff we talk about it, and the Substack.
Yeah, do check out the Substack. I've got a new article on there from a few days ago, which is a light-hearted one, but makes some objectivist points based on a cartoon. So please do check it out if you're a member at the right level, which I think is the gold level, isn't it, to be a member of the Substack, or you can, sign up to the Substack independently if you want to read all of the articles, which include articles on Israel and other subjects as well. So please do check that out. And of course, tomorrow we've got the philosophy forum for members at the platinum level and above, where we discuss all sorts of philosophical issues related either to the day, to personal issues, to specific areas of philosophy, and together with James Valiant on every Saturday. So please consider joining that and checking that out as well.
And when you mentioned Substack, your article has recently, or an article written by you, Richard, has recently come out. So you can find all the links in the description. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Dan. Also the contact to everyone is going to be in the description. We'll see you tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective. Until then, bye-bye.